Hi, and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's overall review for Game of Thrones Season 5. In this video, I'm going to take a look back at Season 5 and give my opinions on Season 5 as a whole. So, spoiler warning if you have not seen Season 5, as I will be talking specifically about things that happened this season. This review will be more of a generalized about my basic feelings of the whole season. If you want more specific reviews, you can check out my individual episode reviews on each episode of the season. I will try not to make too many comparisons to the books, but many times I won't be able to help myself, but I will be doing a book to show comparison video for season 5 later on that will go more into specifics about that. In this video, I will try to judge the show for the show. So let me begin by giving my overall feelings on Season 5. Before the season started, many people involved with the show said that Season 5 would be the best season yet of Game of Thrones. However, now that the season is over, I know of very few people, actually I don't know of anyone who thinks that. In fact, I've heard a significant amount of people say that Season 5 was the worst season of Game of Thrones. I'm not among those people. I don't think Season 5 was the best, but I don't think it was the worst either. The other thing they said was that Season 5 is going to be really dark, and at the time, based off the books, I couldn't see what could be all that dark other than Jon Snow's stabbing. But then there was also Ramsay's brutal treatment of his wife, which was made worse in the show by making that character a character we know and care about, Sansa. And the Arya storyline with her stabbing out Meryn Trant's eyes was darker than it was in the books. And then there was things like the horrific slaughter at Hardhome and the burning of Shireen that wasn't in the books. So yeah, Season 5 did pan out to be really dark. Now, I also think it's fair to say that the show has received the most criticism this year than it has thus far because of many of these choices. It has gotten a lot of heat from those who have read the book and are loyal to them, as it is the biggest departure from the source material thus far. I know many people can't help but compare this new material to the source material. I myself do that in many occasions, and I am not shy to point out when I feel the show's material doesn't live up to the greatness of the source material, but I also acknowledge when I think it does, and I try to judge the show on its own merits instead of viewing it as strictly an adaptation, as I personally feel many others seem to expect the pages from the books to be directly translated to screen, failing to understand that is not how adaptations work, and thus have unrealistic expectations of what they hope to see. That's not to say the only criticism from Season 5 received was from fans of the novels, as this season has been heavily criticized by those who haven't read the novels as well, and that mainly has to do with this being the darkest season yet. While I agree this season takes it to an extreme the show hasn't gone to before with things like Sansa's wedding night and the burning of Shireen, I would argue it is in keeping with what one expects out of this show, and thus I don't think should come as a surprise to anyone. In fact, I would go as far to say that I commend the showrunners for having the courage to go to such extremes knowing the backlash the show would receive. They knew the kind of backlash they would get, they went ahead and they did it anyway because they did what they believed was best for the story, and I think that took courage. I find it refreshing to see showrunners who will do whatever they feel is right regardless of the backlash. And I also think this spirit is in keeping with Martin's novels on which they are based, as it tries to stay true to the harshness of reality instead of sugarcoating things in order to placate audiences like most fictions do. The other thing the showrunners warned viewers about Season 5 was that many characters would die this season, some of which that are still alive in the book. So I thought I'd do a final tally of all those that died this season. In this list, I'll mention only characters who appeared in at least 2 episodes before the episode of their death. So that means characters who died in the same episode they were introduced, such as Loboda or the Wildling Chieftain, will not be included. So now let me go location by location to talk about each storyline, and I'll go in the same order the intro credits do, and we'll start in King's Landing. King's Landing this year was shaping up to be my favorite storyline of the year. However, I thought it fizzled out towards the end of the season, so it ends up being my second favorite storyline of the year. I'll get into what my favorite one is later on, but this was the storyline I was most looking forward to see the conflict between Margaery and Cersei, which was something the show has been building for a while, and this did not at all disappoint. It was like a game of chess. Margaery thought she was on top because she had control of Tommen, but then Cersei steps up her game by having Loras arrested, so Margaery calls in her grandmother, Lady Olenna, to even things out, and then Cersei tricks Margaery into being arrested as well, but then with Littlefinger's help, Lady Olenna then gets Cersei arrested. So the end result is Cersei reaching her lowest point in her life with the Walk of Shame, and it was awesome how it played out. It was also really interesting to see Cersei's downfall, as she thought she was just really clever and empowered by bringing the Faith Militant to power, but it ended up blowing up right in her face. And it turns out that it was massively stupid, and it would have repercussions for everyone down the line. So I absolutely loved the scenes with Margaery taunting Cersei and manipulating Tommen against Cersei. These were some of my favorite scenes of the year, and I was absolutely loved seeing Lady Olenna come in and try to clean house, and eventually scheming with Littlefinger again. These scenes to me are prime examples of what makes Game of Thrones great. However, where King's Landing storyline fizzled for me is after episode 7, when they didn't get much of it. We only got a few scenes in episode 8 of Cersei being mistreated in her cell. We got no King's Landing in episode 9, and in episode 10 we just got the Walk of Shame scene with Cersei, which was good and all, but I was really disappointed we didn't get any follow-up with Margaery, Loras, Lady Olenna, Littlefinger, and Tommen. They all kind of disappeared after episode 7, which I think was a huge mistake because they were all part of what made King's Landing storyline so great. So although I still liked seeing Cersei get her comeuppance, it wasn't as good as it could have been because too many characters were left out. But it most certainly was one of the best storylines of the season. So next we'll go to the Vale, and there are two storylines that rank concurrently that started in the Vale and finished in Winterfell, so I'll split those up, and I'll take this opportunity in the Vale to talk about Brienne and Podrick. So towards the beginning of the season, it seemed it was just Brienne and Podrick sitting around, being all moping and, just complaining. And in the second half of the season, they were just standing around watching a tower looking for a candle to be lit. And when it was lit, they weren't even there to see it. I can't tell you how disappointing that was. So their whole storyline this season seemed to be building up to Brienne killing Stannis, which was foreshadowed a bit with Brienne telling Podrick about it at the start of the season, but the bulk of her story arc seemed to be about her protecting Sansa, which she failed to do because she was too preoccupied with getting revenge on Stannis. I do get that that's probably what they were going for, to have it so she had to choose between her oath to protect Sansa and her vow on getting revenge on Stannis, and she chose poorly. But if that is what the show was getting at, I don't think it accomplished its job very well, and it could have been handled a lot better. And ultimately, I felt my time on Brienne was a bit wasted this season, much of it as it was last season, so I don't consider this to be a very effective storyline. So next we'll go on to Winterfell, where we'll talk about Sansa and her goings-ons. Now, unlike many people, I wasn't opposed to the idea of Sansa taking Jeyne Poole's place as Ramsay's bride. In fact, I was excited about it because I thought it would be an interesting way to keep Sansa relevant to the plot while also making Ramsay and Theon, who in previous seasons were just peripheral characters, more important to the overall story. So I liked the idea of it, but I felt the execution of it just didn't work. In the beginning, Littlefinger convinces Sansa to marry Ramsay in order to get revenge on the Boltons, so that was the plot line I was expecting to see. But instead, what we got was Jeyne Poole's storyline from the books, with just down Sansa instead of Jeyne, where she had to be rescued like a damsel in distress by Theon at the end. I don't think they did a very good job of explaining why Sansa agreed to this and what her overall plan was. Just some vague talk about revenge, and then Littlefinger explaining the plan was for Stannis to come and take Winterfell and make her Wardeness of the North. But if that was the plan, then why not deliver her directly to Stannis? Why bother with this marriage at all? But Littlefinger explained his backup plan was for Sansa to make this Bolton boy hers. I'm not sure what that means, but she doesn't seem to even try this, as she's just hostile to him from the start, and of course it all backfires when he just locks her up in her room and beats and rapes her on a nightly basis. Unlike most people, I wasn't too shocked at how Ramsay treated her on their wedding night, as that seems totally in keeping with this character. I'm more surprised people would expect it to go down any other way, but I was more disappointed by what came in the following episodes of her being locked in her room and this being a nightly occurrence. To me, this is where the storyline went downhill. While it's true Jeyne Poole suffered a worse fate in the books, Sansa is not Jeyne, and I would have thought Ramsay would have tried to treat her well in order to please his father and keep their alliances to the north. It does make the first half of the season, when they're all having dinner together, a bit irrelevant if they're all he's going to do is just lock her in the room like a prisoner. I do see that they were trying to make her different from Jeyne Poole in regard of her being more aggressive, and sometimes she did try to mess with Ramsay's head, and ultimately the way she chipped away at Theon and got him to admit her brothers were still alive. And I think it could be said that she was responsible for Theon's turn from the dark side at the end, for constantly chipping away at him like that. So in a roundabout way, you could justify that scene as something she orchestrated, but that's not good enough for me. And overall, I found Theon's sudden turn unbelievable. I don't think they built it up enough, so I don't consider this storyline a complete failure, but it failed to live up to my expectations, and it did seem a bit disjointed, like it wasn't consistent or handled with care. Too many things didn't really make much sense, such as what her ultimate plan was, and I felt there are many ways in which the storyline could have been good, so ultimately I see it as a failed opportunity. I hope that Sansa Season 6 storyline will, in retrospect, justify this one. So I want to go to the Wall next, but first let's talk about the storyline that took place between the Wall and Winterfell, and that's Stannis. This is the storyline I really liked this year, and in fact I might even go as far to say that this was the most interesting season for Stannis yet. Of course, Season 5 told the story of his downfall, as he was one of the major players still in play, and it was quite a significant thing. He starts this season out at the Wall, and seeing his interactions with Jon Snow were amazing. Also, just to see the mix of Wall characters interacting with Stannis storyline characters was great. To see like Sam and Gilly talk to Shireen and Davos talk to Jon and Melisandre, all good stuff. But of course, the overall storyline with Stannis' quest to take over Winterfell, which is true Game of Thrones fashion, ended in utter failure. The sacrifice of Shireen, which was an amazingly acted and emotionally powerful scene, was meant to be what saved Stannis, but ended up leading to his downfall, and it will certainly leave Melisandre questioning her faith. I personally thought this was brilliant and played with Martin's common themes of how prophecies are often misleading, as what Melisandre thought would happen didn't, and instead the opposite happened. So overall, I felt the Stannis storyline was one of the better of the season. So now let's actually go to the wall and talk about Sam and Jon Snow. This is a storyline it's hard for me to talk about without mentioning the books, because it's impossible for me to know what I would have thought of this had I not read the books, because I had, and I can't help but think this overall storyline was handled much better in the books. The one big exception being the battle at Hardhome, which by far was the highlight of the storyline and was a vast improvement on how it was handled in the books, because it was so vital after being told for 5 seasons how dangerous the White Walkers are to actually finally see it. And I'm sure the consequence has big implications for the overall storyline going forward. But other than that, I feel I didn't see enough of Jon Snow being Lord Commander, because other than that episode, he was mostly just sitting behind his desk writing stuff. Whereas in the books, there was a lot more going on, with Jon trying to integrate the wildlings into the Night's Watch. A couple of wildlings even became members of the Night's Watch, and of course Jon, with Stannis' help, actually tried to rebuild and reman the other Night's Watch castles on the wall, and they even used some of the wildlings to help them. To me, this was a very important to prep for the White Walker invasion, and in the show we got some throwaway line where Jon tells Janos to go rebuild the castle, but out of context it doesn't really make any sense. There was just so much more going on that made Jon Snow's stabbing at the end much more powerful, and you could actually feel like the mutineers were justified in a sense, even though you still thought they were wrong. Whereas in the show they just came off as incredibly stupid and stubborn. Don't get me wrong, I ultimately liked the Wall storyline in Season 5. There were some great moments like Jon's interactions with Stannis and Janos Slynt being beheaded, and of course Hardhome sequence was amazing. However, I did feel the rest was kind of lacking and not as good as it could have been, and ultimately it felt a bit rushed. So now we'll head on over to Braavos, which overall I think is a storyline much improved from the books. I had, heard some complaining that they felt the storyline was a bit boring as you just watch Arya sweeping or washing bodies, but honestly I thought her book storyline was far more boring, but that's just me. I felt this was a very important season for Arya, in which her character really made great strides. I liked how she began as a naive and punchy Arya that we all know and love, but she was slowly learning from Jaqen H'ghar and the Waif how to be a faceless man, which at the heart of it seems to be to lose all identity and sense of self. I loved the scenes where she learned how to lie and manipulate, which she practiced by getting a dying girl to drink poisoned water. And of course, the ending of her storyline this season was amazing, as when she saw someone from her list, she couldn't help herself but revert back to Arya Stark and use her training to kill Meryn Trant, who is a truly despicable man, and if anyone deserved to die like that, he did. But doing this led to her being punished, as it was clear she didn't understand what it meant to be a faceless man. And so Jaqen and the Waif, whoever they really are, proved to her and the audience what it really means to have no identity, as we aren't sure who these people actually are, because the faceless men are truly no one. So I didn't think that the storyline was too long or too short. I thought it was just right, and it showed just enough to make a compelling and convincing story that showed Arya's growth. That was definitely one of the better storylines of the season, and ended on a hollering cliffhanger, and I can't wait to see what happens next. So next we'll head on over to Pentos to follow Tyrion's storyline, as he was actually on a journey from Pentos to Volantis to Old Valyria to Meereen. Now, I like Tyrion's storyline this season. However, it did seem to me that Tyrion wasn't as present as much as he's been in the previous seasons. He may have gotten just as much screen time as he had before, but there wasn't as many awesome Dinklage moments where he truly shone as there was in the 4 previous seasons, particularly once he made it to Meereen and became basically a secondary character to Daenerys. However, overall, I was pretty happy with Tyrion's storyline this year. It was pretty solid. Seeing his interactions with Varys in the first part of the season was great, as he just wanted to drink himself to death. Seeing those two together is always great. And then seeing him with Jorah in the mid-season was also good. Sometimes Jorah got on my nerves a little bit by being too much of a stick in the mud, but the scenes where Jorah and Tyrion started to bond I thought were phenomenal. But I didn't like how towards the end of the season Jorah started being a dick to Tyrion again. I was just like, oh, shut up, Jorah. And of course, Tyrion's scenes with Daenerys once he was in Meereen was amazing. It was so awesome to see those two interact, and seeing the look on Tyrion's face when she rode off on Drogon's back was priceless. So overall, not my favorite storyline of the season, but a solid one no less. I can't really find fault with it. So next, let's go to Meereen. As I alluded to earlier, there was a storyline that was my favorite of the season, so this one is it. I felt this was the best year for Dany since season 2. I'm not just being biased because Daenerys is my favorite character, but because last year in season 4, I felt her storyline was one of the weakest of the season, since I felt she was just spinning her wheels, but ultimately I feel in retrospect it was all just a setup for this season, just as I hope some of the weaker storylines this season are mainly just a setup for next season. However, this is where Daenerys is really put to the test by having to deal with a full-blown insurgency. I've heard a lot of people badmouth the Unsullied this year, thinking they came off as pretty ineffective, but I couldn't disagree more, and I think these people are being a bit unfair to the Unsullied, as they are used to fighting in open battles and not combating this domestic terrorism type tactics of the Sons of the Harpy. And as for the criticism of the specific battle in which Barristan Selmy was killed, I think people are severely underestimating how outnumbered they were. They were outnumbered by at least 3-1, and Barristan took out like 12 people himself, so I think they both were pretty damn good considering the odds. At any rate, this was a bigger problem for Dany, as she wasn't used to fighting an uprising like this, and as I said about her season 4 storyline, she was on a downward spiral as she kept making mistake after mistake, and this season began with the continuation of that spiral, but it was interesting to see that all accumulate in the big showdown in the fighting pits, where she realized her strength by remembering she is the mother of dragons, and like the season 2 conclusion, she comes to remember her magic is more powerful than her opponents will ever be. And seeing the journey she went on through the season to come to that conclusion was amazing. And of course, it's not over yet, as she's trapped out in the Dothraki Sea surrounded by strangers. But this is an awesome setup for season 6, as I'm sure she'll again get up to great things. So we get the final destination on the map, Dorne, and my feelings on Dorne go along with the common consensus that this storyline was an utter failure. Throughout the season, I actually stuck up for Dorne, and I felt people were being too harsh on it. In particular, was the Sand Snakes. Every time they appeared, an uproar on the internet would follow, but personally, I didn't see what the big deal was. And I mean, I didn't think they were great, but I didn't see what was so bad about them either. Personally, I think the biggest fault in the Dorne storyline was we didn't see enough of it. The characters weren't very fleshed out, and I don't see how they expect to introduce all these new characters and then barely show them. Of course, they're going to come off as two-dimensional if you do that. But the main problem with Dorne's storyline was it was too simplistic. It was just really about the Sand Snakes trying to kill Myrcella, and the only real attempt came from a fight that many felt was overly choreographed. And other than that, they just managed to kill her with some poison at the end. Why not just do that in the first place if that was their plan? Like during the fight scene with Nymeria grabbed Myrcella and said, "Come with me." Why not just kill her then? Why not just put poison on her, just slit her throat, if that was their ultimate plan anyway? And overall, it just seems like a stupid plan, especially after Doran made it clear that he'd kill her if she did that, and they just went ahead and did it anyway. This whole storyline reeks of poor planning, and it did not come off well at all. So yeah, I didn't hate this storyline as much as most people did, but I agree it was definitely the weakest of the season. I actually want to see more of it next year because I hope they can do a great storyline next year that will, in retrospect, justify the existence of this one. So to close up my Season 5 review, I just summarized that Season 5 by saying I kind of see where many involved with the show viewed it as the best season so far, as the ending of the season was one epic powerhouse blowout after another, from the battle at Hardhome to the Drogon attack in the fighting pits to Stannis' downfall to Cersei's walk of shame to Jon Snow's stabbing. The problem I see with this season is that it took too long for it to get started, as many of the episodes in the first half of the season were kind of weak, and then a couple of the storylines such as the Dorne, Sansa, and Brienne's missed their mark entirely and failed to accomplish what the writers intended to. However, that doesn't change the fact on how epic other storylines were, like Daenerys', Arya's, King's Landing, and Stannis's, and the fact it featured two of the best sequences of the entire series, with the battle at Hardhome and the dragon attack in the fighting pits. So my rating for Season 5 as a whole is a 9 excellent. So that's it for my review of Game of Thrones Season 5. Be sure to check out my channel, as I will be doing my top 10 favorite characters of Season 5, my top 10 episodes of the season, my top 20 favorite moments, as well as my 10 least favorite moments, as well as many more Game of Thrones videos to come over the break. So make sure you subscribe to keep up with all that, and thanks a lot for watching.